Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the October edition of the DEFCon speaker series. I am Rupika Rizim. I am the director of the Digital Ethnic Futures Consortium, and we're really excited to have our speaker today, Gisely Colón López. I am going to briefly remind you of some of the events that we have on the horizon. We have been running a really exciting reading group. So there's a meeting coming up with the reading group in November. We're reading Digital Pedagogy in the Humanities, which is co-edited by DEFCON's own Kathy Harris here in the Zoom. So we're sort of reading entries from that book and having opportunities for casual conversation. We also have the November speaker series event coming up on November 14th, where Annalisa Shrout will be discussing institutional critique with students as collaborators and discussing work she's done on institutional histories with students, which promises to be really exciting. So I'm just dropping a link to the chat and encourage you to join us for events in the future. But we're very glad to have you here today. Gisely Colón López will be talking about digital mapping as a strategy for course community building. She has more than 10 years of experience working as an educator in public schools for both K-12 and in higher education in the Northeast of the US. She fuses her lived experience as a multilingual learner and mixed media artist, develop a praxis of engagement settings. An advocate and student of the field of ethnic studies, Gisely is interested in exploring the pedagogical and epistemological processes that contribute to the effectiveness of ethnic studies beyond statistical metrics such as graduation rates and test scores. A doctoral student at the CUNY Graduate Center, she engages decolonial theories, digital archives, digital mapping, and critical visual methodologies as the basis of her research. So please join me in using a reaction to welcome our speaker, Gisely Colón López.
Thank you so much, and good morning and good afternoon to everybody. I'm excited to be able to be here today and appreciative to share my work, share the work of the students that I work with, and engage in conversation with you all with regards to mapping. And I do want to acknowledge and thank Rupika and the entire DEFCon team. I was a teaching fellow last year, and really the work that we're going to talk about today has evolved largely as a result of that mentorship that I received and the experience and support all of last year with the program. So I'm really excited to be here to talk about that also. So here is our movement for today. You can think of this also as our agenda or our table of contents. This is 5 different sections that we'll be going through to discuss. We'll start by talking about what are maps and how do we conceptualize of maps? How do we see them? How do we engage with them? How do I use them in the course room? And then we'll move into talking about mapping digital archives as my entry into how I'm really developing mapping into the courses that I teach. I spoke a little bit about this if you attended the annual meeting last spring, and it's an evolution from that. So it's a process that I'm going to take you all on with me of how this is developed. And then we'll talk a little bit about mapping and community building and the activities that I've engaged in to engage that praxis using engaged pedagogy based on Bell Hooks's engaged pedagogy, the theorization she does in her book, Teaching to Transgress. And then we're going to take this movement and do a slight pause, take a moment to drink some water, take a moment to do some breathing exercises or move around in this digital space that we occupy on Zoom. And I will walk you through an interactive exploration of how to actually use mapping as a digital tool. And lastly, I will wrap up the talk by engaging in a conversation to show you how you can construct your own maps for teaching and learning. And I want to be, it's intentional that I'm speaking of this from a space of being a professor and teaching in a classroom, but these skills and these frameworks and these activities and mapping can be used beyond educational settings. So you might be facilitating an administrative meeting, you might be representing a nonprofit organization. These are all spaces that I truly believe mapping can exist in and will have the same types of benefits with the different communities in those spaces. So we'll start by talking about what are maps. I've got this little graphic here, and we're going to go through. This is an actual map that I use in the courses that I teach. I teach Puerto Rican and Latino studies, and we use this map to contextualize and to where Latino communities exist in the United States, right? So it's information sharing, there's stories here, there's history here. So this is one mode of communication with mapping. Mapping can also be used to help us get from Harlem to Tucson, Arizona. They give us directions and routes, and they tell us where to turn, where the tolls are. And sometimes these maps tell us where the speeding radars are located, right? When we're driving. So that's another form of information that mapping takes us through. Mapping can be used as political statements, such as this artist that used a map of Puerto Rico to bring attention to the colonial status, the political statement to discuss that status between the United States and Puerto Rico with regards to colonial language that's used to refer to the United States sometimes as the mainland, right? And then I came across this map, right? There's all these different ways to use maps, and this map shows the different ways that people laugh around the world digitally. So they use different numbers, they use different sounds, different letters. And I thought that this was really interesting, especially with the different symbols that you see here. And then here's a map that someone created with Google My Maps, fully customizable. And this person started a map of where you can find fresh cider donuts or pre-made cider donuts in the Northeast, right? Here's some more interactive usability. And this map I appreciate because the data is very well represented. There's the blue markers and the purple markers, right? So the information is clearly presented here, right? So that's just going through of what maps do. Now, the framework for what I'm going to start talking about with you all today, I began conceptualizing mapping as a form of engagement and retention for the educational spaces that I'm immersed in. And I'm going to tease that out in the next couple of slides. My intentionality is to frame this dialogue based on my teaching practices over the last several years, specifically with high school students taking college credit and a traditional college student population that varies in age and experience and generation. These are two images of my first attempt at incorporating mapping into a course project. On the left-hand side is mapping with the CUNY Digital History Archive. I created a collection for that archive. It preserves the history of the City University of New York. And on the right-hand side is a community building map where we were mapping Latinx foods. So the critique that I have at this point from these Z-maps that were the final products of the semester that this was incorporated in, the stories, the narrative, and the data don't emerge as visually or aesthetically as I wanted, right? It looks a little messy. There's a lot of different colors. It's on Google Maps. There's a lot of words, so you can't extract, right? So you can't see here in a lower Manhattan, a student marked a point where there was some activism and protests happening with regards to tuition hikes, protesting tuition hikes at the university. And then down here in the Brooklyn area, you can see there's like a little pink circle with a little red dot. That's supposed to be Brooklyn College, one of the universities that I teach at, and those are the markers, right? So all of that gets lost. And even on the right-hand side, this is where students mapped their favorite places to eat Latinx foods. It gets lost in all of the bubbles, right? All of these different numbered bubbles in there. And it's customizable. You can shift this in a program called ZMaps. But I was looking for something different, and we're going to see that evolution happen with the projects that I'm going to share with you all today. Here's my framework for mapping as skills development, right? So here's again where I am thinking about student retention in the way of developing their skill set for college. So one of the first objectives or goals is to have students engage with digital archives using a critical framework analysis, really interrogating the role of power, the presence of power within the digital archives. Okay, they learn how to do research, they learn how to read primary documents, and students and participants can learn history through ethnic studies and more, right? So I am a practitioner, a student of, and a scholar of ethnic studies. So that's my direct learning goal, but this transcends to many different fields and disciplines as well. And then there's the writing development for students, where mapping can be used to support the writing development through high stakes and low stakes reflective assignments that I'll show you an example of. You can use different prompts for the maps, and you can incorporate annotated references and bibliographies into the mapping that students do. And I really frame this because I am very intentional in thinking about, I have a cohort of students for about 15 weeks based on the calendar that we use at CUNY. And I'm always trying to figure out how students can use our time together in the course session beyond just the 15 weeks that we're together. So I'm constantly thinking of them moving through and connecting and completing their credit or certification for graduation requirements, which is what brings us all together into the space for those 15 weeks. This is an image of the CUNY Digital History Archive, just so that you have an example of it. Towards the end of the talk, I'm going to share a link to a website with a bunch of resources, to a bunch of the different examples and the different maps that I'm sharing with you today. Okay, and this one was specifically on Puerto Rican studies at Brooklyn College. And I just want to acknowledge that this photo here is a photo by Tony Nieves, who was a student at Brooklyn College in the 60s. And this was a ceremony to celebrate Malcolm X. It's a memorial for Malcolm X. It's a Black Solidarity Day. And that flag, the Puerto Rican flag, was raised on the pole on campus. Okay, this links to another framework that I have, another piece of retention for students, which is why I wanted to describe that photo to you all. Here is the outcome of students, of student work mapping on ZMaps. All right, so here is Brooklyn College. We can see Brooklyn College campus here extends between the West Quad and the East Quad. And there's 3 little markers on this map. You can see that there's an image here, right? It's a little bit small for what I was hoping for, but you can add links, you can scroll through the description, students write the description, right? But it's still a little what I call noisy in the background, right? There's still a lot of other information that really takes away from centering this student data that relates to the archives that students were mapping. And here's an example of a low stakes reflective assignment that students did. And they mapped one of the archival items that they found that was interesting for them. They just chose to focus on a list of 18 demands that students presented to the university. And they wrote a short reflective piece. They summarized the digital archive item, and then they reflected on it. And then there was an annotation at the bottom for them to get the practice and exercise of creating a well-written or appropriately written citation style. Okay, this student wrote, I'm just going to read this little excerpt. I found this remarkably interesting because the effort they made in the college allowed myself and other students to take courses that teach us about Puerto Rico and its history. And I engaged this as a term of retention because it's a direct positionality for the student to see themselves and to feel themselves connected literally to the campus. So next time they walk past that pole that I spoke about in the image for the digital archives, they will think about that 50-year history where 50 years ago, students were fighting for inclusion in the university. We're fighting to take the courses that the students in this course are taking today. So it transforms literally how students walk on campus. It makes them feel more connected. And in my theorization so far, that helps with retentions because students will feel more connected to the campus. Okay. So here's some more of the development with ZMaps in particular. On the left-hand side is our digital syllabus that's available online through the Commons, the CUNY Commons, and a WordPress plugin. And you can see I had the free account at first, and the free account is limited. And when we still had access to the map, there was an ad that was displayed when we embedded it into WordPress, which I put a little disclaimer on top saying that I don't endorse, that we don't endorse any of the ads that ZMaps puts in. And it was also, again, it's the aesthetic and the visual that just distracts from the information on that page. And on the right-hand side, you can see that we went over our maximum amount of visits. So the map was no longer accessible to students through the free account, which was a challenge that we had to work through. Because I hope that these maps are spaces that students can come back into and engage with beyond just the 15 weeks we're together in a semester. And this was very clearly a challenge and obstacle for us. So I started trying to figure out, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? So this was the end of the semester, and I just want to walk us through. This is what it looks like when I started paying for ZMaps. You can see it's a lot cleaner. I changed the size of the markers, changed the colors to make it a little bit more visual, which you can do on ZMaps and you can do in a lot of different maps, but it's still, you have that busy Google Maps background in the back, you know, and we're going to talk about an alternative to that. Now, coming back to my framework of mapping as a form of, now we're going to talk about it as community building and through engaged pedagogy. And I've done this, this is where I incorporate group work. I do want to be honest and transparent that group work is a challenge for me to implement into course rooms, and I'm still working on that. And in person and virtually, it's a lot more challenging virtually, I've learned. But I've implemented this activity both in person and virtual, and it's been successful so far. So I do want to make that connection. And so as an engaged praxis, I bring in her book, Teaching to Transgress, where she states it's crucial for me as a professor and every other student to be an active participant, not a passive consumer. And this is a direct, in direct contrast or in relation to what Paulo Freire talks about, the banking system of education, where students are just deposited information and they're not actively engaged in sharing their own bodies of knowledge into the classroom. So I bring that into here, and I see mapping as a tool to uphold that and to activate that into the classroom. So to start with this one, students were placed into small groups. They chose the size of their groups, And I encouraged them to start talking with each other about what kinds of street foods, what kind of Latino street foods, because that's the focus of our course, they like to eat in. And then they had these conversations with each other. They were also given the opportunity to talk about memories with foods and engage in dialogue. So they did that for about, I would say, 10 minutes for the in-person course, and just about the same for the Zoom, for virtual learning. And then they individually mapped their outcomes, and then they got the opportunity to look at each other's work and talk about each other's work in different ways. And I have some student testimonios, student reflections based on participating with this. And so this first student stated that even though I'm not Hispanic, I got to learn more about my classmates, right? So we see that community building happening here, where students are getting to know each other beyond ethnic and national identities, nationalized identities. This student stated, it's interesting because places we walk past and never tried before can be someone's go-to place. So now we're transcending the four walls of our classroom, or the little boxes, that the little lines that make up our Zoom boxes, and they're actually placing themselves out physically into their communities, but also making that connection with each other, right? So they could look at this map and see someone mark something in an area that they spend a lot of time in, and they're like, oh, look, I didn't know that that was there, or I've always seen that, walk past it and thought to go there. And who knows, right? At some point, this was on Zoom, so those conversations are a little more difficult to happen, but they could maybe link up one day and go to share an experience of breaking bread together at one of these spaces. And here is another quote. A student shared, "It allows me to see a lot of different Latino places and feel comfort knowing my community is so big." So again, the student is transcending course content and making a connection to the visual on a map and seeing their community spread out beyond just the areas that they're used to occupying and used to being in. Okay. So I would like to take this moment to do a check-in and to invite anyone into the chat. We'll hold space for about 2 minutes to see. I'd love to hear if anyone has any ideas for how you can integrate mapping into your own activities, programs, or curriculums. If anyone would like to share that into the chat, we'll take this moment for 2 minutes to pause and have that shared moment on the chat. See, thank you, Catherine. And thank you, Cara. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Catherine, you say you have a colleague that's interested in a mapping assignment. If I'd love to learn more. Retention, yes. Oh, that's awesome. What a great connection, Cara. Thank you for surfacing that. Yeah, it's great. Okay, now in order to just extend this little quick pause, and I'm gonna take some water and just do a couple breathing to continue into the second half of our talk today. I'm going to play a short, we can think of this as a short little commercial, short little mini 1 minute, a minute and a half intermission for a trailer for a documentary that is linked to the archives that I created. Some of you may have seen this. I appreciate being able to share this because sometimes we see something new when we watch this. So I'm just going to share this for a minute and a half.
We were young, we were idealistic, we were fearless.
We had a culture. We had a history.
That time at the level, the shots give back.
Colonialism has been imposed. It's enough. All we're talking about is getting a better education.
That you could insist on the Puerto Rican Studies Department. How dare you? And then we realized our power. That we could make the impossible possible. Qué bonita bandera, qué bonita bandera, qué bonita bandera es la bandera puertorriqueña.
Okay, awesome. So I took my water, I took a break, and I was able to, I'm checking out your chat. You all have the chat and you're all, most of you are engaged in some really exciting projects. I appreciate you sharing all of that. I think that the second half, I'm going to share some more projects of a development in this that I think will respond to some of these interests that are surfacing. And I see, where did it go? Someone mentioned using census data. Definitely, there's a program that I'm learning with GIS called Map Info using census data. That's a lot more technical, more tech advanced. Like you need a lot of skills for that, but that might be interesting. So thank you so much for your active listening and your active engagement in the chat. And we will continue right along with the interactive explorations. This is, when I originally planned for this talk, I was hoping that I would be able to lead attendees with an actual mapping on a map where you get the experience of that. Unfortunately, the technicalities of all of that were beyond the scope of a 1-hour talk. But I'm going to share, and I am going to share these slides with you all. I remember reading that in a chat. I will share that link towards the end of the talk. And so I have some tips for you all to get started, and I want to show you how you can get started for free with a free account with a very user-friendly program. And that program is UMAP. UMAP lets you create customizable maps through OpenStreetMap. Okay, it's different layers. And we're going to talk a little bit more about OpenStreetMaps at the end of this, but I wanted to start with a focus on UMAP because there's a direct comparison that I can be making between ZMaps and UMAP. And I want to highlight the differences and why I've moved towards UMAP. Okay, so this is what it looks like. I do not suggest you just Google UMAP to find it because there's a bunch of other programs that will come up on your search results. If you're gonna look it up, it's UMAP and OpenStreetMaps will give you the first link that should come up. And that's what it looks like. And then you'll click on the login or sign in page. You will need an OpenStreetMaps account for this. And it'll work directly with OpenStreetMaps, right? So you'll get this, it asks for a provider. So UMaps is, think about Photoshop, if you're familiar with Photoshop, where you create on a canvas and you add layers on top of it. So in that canvas, the first layer has OpenStreetMap, which is where your satellite imaging comes in through your vertical aerial imaging. And then on top of that satellite imaging, you can build your data on top of that. And we're going to talk today about pulling from that satellite imaging with OpenStreetMap. Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But basically, when you start with UMAP, here's what it looks like. It is a European program, and the default language for it is French. So here's my first tip on here's how, it took me like 5 or 6 DIY videos because I'm all self-taught with this to figure out how to change it to English. So you click this little stack here that's called the title layer, and that will open up this menu on the right-hand side. And then you want to click on OpenStreetMap. Okay, so the default is the top one that says FR for France. and you want to click the second one, and it changes the whole map into English. Okay, so that's number one. I also want to point out here on the top left-hand side, this is where you give your map a name. Okay, so you want to make sure to update that. And as you can see in this next slide, I've given my map Puerto Rican Studies. I've changed it. You can call it whatever you'd like. Now, the next feature that took me a while to find, but it's very useful and is different. I didn't see this on the HT box that comes up, right? I don't speak HTML. I don't have that language in my mind. But when you're adding a pointer and this box comes up, this little tool comes up to input information, if you click the little question mark next to the description, you'll see that it brings up how to HTML code, right? And I have this example for us here in the little description box where I used the link with text code where the arrow is pointing to, and I also used the image code of how to upload an image. Okay. Another piece of information that I found very helpful, and shout out to my mentor RC from the teaching fellowship last year, because this saved me a lot of time. You need to have an image that has a URL address. Okay. You can find that by right-clicking an image and choosing copy image address. Okay, there's different ways. You can feel free to Google that or reach out to me if you want to talk about this. But that's another tip that I'm going to put out there. So if you're putting in a URL for an image and it doesn't come up, it's possible that it's not a URL for the actual image. You see how here it ends in ping? It also works for JPEG. Okay, so you want to make sure that that you see that. Wikipedia is a great resource for getting images with URLs fairly easily, really easily. And you can already see, so here's an example of this HTML box, right? So I put a clickable link with text and I put an image, and here's what it looks like. Now, if you remember, and I have a couple of comparison photos to put together, this already looks very different than the Z maps we were looking for. The map on the left-hand side is a lot cleaner looking. I was able to customize my markers, and since this map is aligned to Puerto Rican Studies, I've put the Puerto Rican flag. You can change the colors on it. They have different symbols that you can use that are already within the program. You don't need to use your own symbols, but you have that option, right? And this is fun because students can get creative, right? Students can self-identify. If they're working on mapping in a group project, each group can have their own different customized marker. Okay, and so here is another example of what my mapping now looks like. Again, it's this difference where it's a lot cleaner, it's a lot more visible. The markers stand out in a way that they weren't standing out on the Z maps. And here's a comparison, just so that you have them both and you can look at them on the left-hand side, right? It's a traditional Google mapping, images, imagery, and then on the right-hand side, right, you can barely see the markers on the left-hand side image, even if they were, a different color. It's a lot more visually, aesthetically useful and productive on the right-hand side. Here's another example, and this one maps Boricuas in Hawaii, Puerto Rican origins in Hawaii. Again, just the visual of it, you can click. For this one, I haven't included pictures only because I don't have the URL for the pictures that I want to use. So that's something that I'm going to work on and develop. But already you can start to see and feel the differences, or at least I hope that you can start to recognize those. Here's a map of New York City. Again, just different pointers, looks a little cleaner. It's still busy, but the data isn't lost on UMap, right? So it looks different, which was really important to me. And then I engage in a praxis of completing or doing the assignments before I ask students to complete them. It helps me troubleshoot. It puts me in the place of the student. It lets me feel vulnerable in a way that the student might feel vulnerable or uncomfortable. And it just gives me that experience to help support the student learning in the classroom. So here's an example that I went and did. I usually encourage students to do what we call mini ethnographies in a neighborhood of their choice. I encourage them not to use their home neighborhoods because we try to keep this as anonymous as possible so that you can't identify the student at all. What I chose to do for this one is to go around different neighborhoods in Brooklyn and take photos of where I find the Puerto Rican flag, just to show the Puerto Rican community in Brooklyn, New York. And here's the beauty of exercising and the process of some of these assignments. I found a garage of about 4 or 5 different garages near a train station in Bushwick, Brooklyn, that had a Puerto Rican flag of different colors, the black and white one and the regular blue and red one. And then there were a bunch of coquis that were spray painted on the garage doors. And the coquí is a small frog that was once native to Puerto Rico, but now resides in Hawaii also, and other parts of the world. And the owner came out, which was really interesting. I went really early on a Sunday morning thinking that nobody would be there. It'd be a quick take a photo and leave. But the owner saw me and came out and we started a conversation. And I found out that he's a twin and he is the son of Luis Angel Torres, who had recently had a street renamed after him in the Bronx, right? So I'm learning all of this information from this simple assignment, and I decided to map it. And here's what a sample, a model of what that student outcome could be, right? So on the right-hand side, I give some information, right? This is if I click on the marker, some information. I found these photos on Twitter of the street renaming. It has, there's a gentleman here, right here. I believe this is the gentleman that I spoke to, one of the Bushwick twins. And then I, have the links on the bottom. His legacy is survived by family members, such as the Brooklyn twins and the Bronx principal. I linked to the Instagram. And then I gave more information, right? And then at the bottom, you can see is the annotated references. So this is where I bring in a little bit of that academic development for students to get the experience of how to write an APA or MLA or Chicago style annotation, right? I cited the newscasts as well. And if I wanted to, if I wanted to make this a little bit more high stakes, I could ask the students to annotate each reference, right? To write a little paragraph or 2 or however many describing each reference, right? To make that even more, more practical, okay? So that's an example of UMAP. Now I'd like to talk about OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap, remember, is like that first layer. It's the satellite imaging that comes through in order to be able to use UMAP. You can think of OpenStreetMap as the Wikipedia for mapping. It is crowdsourced, it is volunteer run, and it's pretty much anti or rejecting Google Maps because it rejects profit/capitalism, right? So ethically, it might align, for me at least it does, a little bit more with the praxis and the communities that I like to be involved in. There's a OpenStreetMap wiki that has tons of tutorials and information. And here's what it looks like if you have just an OpenStreetMap account. It's literally building a map. So you can go in and build roads. You can go in and highlight a house, or if there's a driveway missing in a house, you can go in and literally map that into this global map that's used by the global community. It's even as technical as if you're looking through the map and there's a driveway that's a little crooked on the map, you can go in and fix that. Like, that's the purpose of it being crowdsourced and available to people. And I have a resource that I'll share with you all about a tutorial for how to do this. This is the license for street maps, very open and available for use. So I was curious, okay, so if this is the public license, then what do people want to do with this, right? And here's an example. OpenStreetMaps does a lot of humanitarian mapping after natural disasters, and this is an example of that in use, where after the hurricane hit Puerto Rico, this map was used to tell humanitarian aid, people bringing that aid, where there was no water, where there is water, where the roads have been, are no longer there, where the bridges have been washed away. What are the best routes? Okay, and this just happens to be one of Puerto Rico, but they have a lot of different projects like this throughout the world. Someone also decided to do a wheel map to identify areas that are wheelchair accessible / friendly. And this is what it looks like on the right-hand side. This is the front page that you'll get, right? It gives you your little legend. And on the left-hand side, I still don't know quite how to feel of the fact that the grad center where I'm currently a doctoral student didn't have any information on it, but right next to us is the Empire State Building. So I decided to check that out and see what's wheelchair accessible. And it prompted me to think maybe I should be engaged with my wheelchair accessible friends to find out if we should do a mapping marathon of some sort to add the wheelchair accessible places onto this map, which is the beauty of OpenStreetMaps, right? Because I can contribute. And if you look down here, it says your good deed of the day, right? I can go to the Empire State Building, take a photo of where it is that it's wheelchair accessible and upload it here. I can add data to this. So it's that multi-user ability that I really appreciate about OpenStreetMaps. And here are two examples as I begin to wrap up this the talk. On the left-hand side, these are projects that require more technical skills and more coding knowledge. We're talking about different programs and different languages for coding. On the left-hand side, we have a project that was created by this organization called GeoChicas. And they mapped street names around the world or in different parts of the world that are named after women. So on the bottom, you can see where the dots are. This is where they've mapped these areas. And the top one is a zoomed in view of Havana, Cuba. And all of the yellow is the streets that are named after women. And if you click on them, you can click and read more about who the woman was. And then on the right-hand side is a digital map by Arte Público, which is a publishing organization or company. And they did a survey of museums and they mapped this data. So it's a survey of small historical societies, libraries, and museums for Hispanic materials and their management. And what I appreciate about this example to share it out with you all, that one was created with Leaflet. I'm not sure what the one on the left was created with. I'd have to go back in, but Leaflet is one of the most, if not the most user-friendly, advanced technical skill mapping platform out there that lets you do all these cool things. You have tabs that you can go through. You can customize it in different ways that UMap is not able to. And I wanted to just also highlight this database down here, because a lot of mapping involves a database that you can extract or import, right? So another project that you can engage in with your students is to use a database that students are populating with different information, and then you import that data from the database into the mapping platform, and it shows the information that way. That is something that I'm developing myself, but I wanted to at least show that there's the relationship between a mapping platform and a database that's there that can also be integrated into your teaching and learning. And I have this really awesome resource. This is the website that I used, the tutorials that I used to teach myself or teach myself along with this. I don't know her name, but this is the OpenStreetMaps for history buffs. And she's really great. She's very it's a pace that I felt very comfortable with. And I was learning a lot about Irish history while engaging with this, which I thought was fun. I was learning a lot about castles and ring forts and cemeteries in Ireland. She also does tutorials for OpenStreetMaps. So it's UMaps and OpenStreetMaps. And I will share the website with you all in a bit. And then lastly, I have, this is the last slide. I've talked a lot about interactive mapping where you can actually place markers on a map and click, and there's these links. But you can also do this in what I call like a very static way where you don't have that interactivity. And this is more like a blog where this person, you have this really like, it looks like something you can print out easily, right? The map with numbers, and here's where it's located, and here's the name of it. And then when you scroll down on this website, you see these images on the right, which are the images that you take, and then you just put them on the website. So it's like a blog that you scroll through. It's not a slippy map like the maps that you can slide through and zoom in and out of. That's what they call them, the slippy maps. So this one's just one that scrolls, and I wanted to share that example during today's talk, just in case, if you're not interested in the interactive mapping with UMap or OpenStreetMap or Leaflet or ZMaps even, you have this as an alternative to think through for some of the projects that you all have, that you all mentioned. And with that, if you have a device connected to the internet and a camera, you can, that's the QR code to get onto the website. Just click on the flyer for today's talk, or I put it into the chat as well, the link that has more resources to some of the maps that I shared today. It has a link to UMap, it has a link to OpenStreetMaps, and you can also feel free to engage with the website. It has 4 different flyers on that front page for digital archives and some resources that I'm still developing for students to use that you may find interesting. Thank you so much for listening and engaging, and I believe we're going to open it up for question and answer or comments if anybody wants to now.
Thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful.
Thanks. Oh, great. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so we have about 10 minutes or so for questions and comments.
Yeah. Would love to hear more about these projects that you all mentioned. Also, if anyone has any developed ideas after all that.
I'll start with a question while everybody's thinking, which is I'm sort of curious about, when you're teaching students and they're using a new tool, how do you balance sort of, the challenge of, teaching how to use the tool, the content that may be new or a new way of thinking for the students, and pulling it all together. So what are some of your strategies for addressing that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I'm still evolving in that. Right now it's there's a lot of conversations that happen at the beginning of this semester. I had a conversation with the students. Hey, I'm exploring mapping and I'm interested in implementing that here. Are y'all interested in learning mapping with me? You can use this on your resumes, right? Because it's a skill that some nonprofit organizations or some other organizations might have an interest in this skill. And they seem, we approach it as let's test it out, right? Because the syllabus that I'm teaching from this semester didn't say digital tools, digital humanities, or mapping at all. So I'm integrating it as a conversation and asking them, are you up for doing this? And this semester I had a student that said they don't like mapping. They don't like this activity. So we've parking lotted, we've placed that comment on hold for the next time we do mapping, and we're gonna collectively as a course community come up with an alternative, because the majority of students are interested in a mapping project. So we're going to continue doing that. But for this student who right now it's only one student, but there may be another student in the classroom who may not want to engage. All right, we're going to collectively figure out what's an equitable alternative while we're all mapping that you can work on. And that's my approach right now as we continue developing. I continue developing this as a praxis.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a brief question, Giselle. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. And I'm currently also teaching a course using mapping and literature, and I was wondering if you have confront any issues or like ways to deal with humanities data, like within the archive. How do you incorporate that data to the maps? Are you seeing any differences, or even like places that are not on the maps? How do you make them present in the map? I don't know if you have confront that specifically using the archival material with mapping.
Thank you for your question, Sylvia. And it's I'm starting with your phrase of what do you do with places not on the map? And I think that that's my first praxis of putting those places on the map, right? And making that visible. And I think that was behind my intentionality with the ethnography of taking pictures of the Puerto Rican flag in Brooklyn. Also as a response to gentrification also, right? It's this whole other ballpark. But with regards to humanities or the literature or digital archives, students, the purpose from my perspective of when I'm teaching, right, is to have students engage with that work and engage with it in interesting and creative, fun ways, right? So the traditional way is find a primary resource or use this literature, read through it, and then maybe have a conversation, right? So activating that knowledge to getting students to analyze more deeply what they're reading so that they can think about the geolocation, the positionality, the physical location of, okay, I'm reading this literature or this poem, or I'm reading this flyer for this rally somewhere. Where is this happening, right? So the students can actually place themselves within the stories and the narratives and the materials. And then coming up with, different ways to place a marker on a map, and the information that is put to describe that marker is the point of where they can elaborate, express, and communicate, right? Give a description, summarize in your own words, what is this archival item that you found? What should we know about it? Why is it important? Reflect on it. How does it integrate, or how does it resonate with your lived experiences in your personal life, right? So that allows the student to get to know the content more complexly, in a more complex way. Yeah, so that's why that's what immediately comes to mind in thinking about your question, Sylvia.
So I'll ask a question if other folks haven't jumped in. So I love that you started with the provocation of movement. And so I'm wondering, and forgive me if you already done this, but I'm wondering if specifically any of the projects you've done track movement between Puerto Rico and where your university is located. I know you're tracking the Puerto Rican flag and Boricuas that are in New York, but I'm wondering if there's a way to track movement between places in an explicit way.
Yeah, like literally, right? What is this? So yes, I'm moving towards that right now. I'm engaging in a practice of how do I teach people, students, how to put a marker on a map, a point on a map. And then there's a function where you can map a line, right? And I think that line is what's going to connect that movement of diasporas. I'm hoping that there's other creative ways to do this as well. But I found data, for instance, in Connecticut out of Trinity College, there's a project that's called the Puerto Rican Heritage Trail that follows the Puerto Ricans in Connecticut on a blog. And I have an interest in getting in touch with them and seeing, are you interested in mapping this, right? Taking each location. And that's where I would incorporate this line feature on UMap, which will literally make that movement visible on that map. So I'm still tinkering with it. Thank you for that. Kara, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly still.
Yeah, it's Kara. Thank you so much.
Kara.
This has just been really fantastic. Thank you so much for all you've shared here.
Appreciations to you all. Yeah.
Oh,
I don't have a question. Oh, do you want to go ahead?
go ahead.
I don't have a question. I just really wanted to, I put this in the chat, but I really appreciated that reflective piece. I think that is something that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of. And I think it's very powerful for the students. So thank you for that.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Ryan.
Yeah, my question was, I mean, the movement stuff is really great, and that's something that I think a lot of us struggle with to try to show, how things move through space. But could you maybe talk about a little more about the connectivity between different kinds of places that may not be movement, maybe like places that are conceptually connected, or that students may share like similar ideas about places, like how to display or how to work with that, like the connections between different places. Could you maybe speak a little bit to that? 'Cause that's something I've been really interested in, and just short of trying to have them all write some bizarre network code, which we don't really want to do. Is there a way of like really showing or modeling like this, the connectivity of how these places are associated with each other?
Thank you for that question, Ryan. And the first thing I thought of was color coding the markers, so that can visually emerge, right? So they're all coded in by color or by symbol, which you can look at. In UMAP, you can also layer your data, right? So you can add different layers. I haven't gotten that deep into UMAP yet, but that might be another strategy, to have different layers on top of each other. I still kind of, as I'm thinking aloud and talking this out, I think the colors are really important, right? So maybe there's a different layer for each item, but there's a different color associated to those different pieces that may not immediately seem like they're connected, but they really are, right? And I think that's really interesting. I appreciate that movement has surfaced throughout this conversation, and with this question and answer now at the end. I'm gonna hold on to that and move forward, thinking through how to continue bringing in movement more intentionally into this.
Thanks.
So we're almost out of time, unless we have one other question.
If nobody else has a question, I'll throw one out there and you can take it or leave it. But I'm also thinking about like how to turn pedagogical projects into publications. And so I'm just, we're all on that tenure clock. And so I'm wondering about if you could share any insight, like, have you taken any, this is so fantastic. Like, have you taken any of this and thought about research collaborations with your students, or how are you getting this important work that you're doing counted at your university, which if your university is like mine, they're sort of struggling to recognize these, like, the amount of work that and import that these digital projects take, because they're not like traditional quote unquote peer reviewed academic journals. So I'm just wondering if you have any insight into that process.
Yes.
Or publications to share with us. I'd love to cite your work.
Well, thank you. Well, Rupika just added one into the chat, the Journal of Interactive Technology and Pedagogy, and reviews in digital humanities. Those are two different journals, right? Yes. I don't have a response for that right now. I know that this would be a challenge. I'm not on the tenure track yet. I'm still working on getting my PhD, and I'm not working full-time anywhere as a professor yet. It's a tension that I hold because I value a lot of open educational resources and open access and a lot of these types of projects. And I know that it is a challenge that I'm going to confront when I am officially full-time on a tenure track. I think if you're not already part of DEFCon, I strongly recommend that you do become a member, because this group is the space where I envision us as like a little army with the best intentions of that word, of changing those norms for what counts towards tenure or not, or what are the definitions of what's credibly publishable, and all of this that you were speaking of, Kara. So I think that this is a space, and with the events that Rupika mentioned, to continue talking about that. I know we've engaged in conversations in this space through this organization to think about that, but I don't unfortunately, I'm so sorry, I really wish I had this is the blueprint. But because I'm, number one, not practicing that yet, and number two, it is a big issue for all of us in this field that are interested in doing this kind of work. but I would absolutely love to co-publish with students. That's part of the evolving nature of having the conversations with them, right? And for example, do you want to do this mapping project together, and explaining to them, right, this is research that I'm doing and research you could be doing. So that's what I have for now, but thank you for that. That's a really important point you're raising.
Thank you so much. It's making me think, Kara, maybe we should do a DEFCon event on this particular topic. Might be a good idea. So I made a note about it. Well, it's 6:02. So thank you. This is amazing inform and content. I mean, I feel like your students are so lucky. I feel like I got like a tiny taste of what it must be like to be in your classroom. So thank you so much for your presentation. We hope that you will join us next month on November 14th at 1 p.m. for Annalise Shrout's talk, Institutional Critique with Student Collaborators, which sort of builds on the idea of using the university as a site of exploration that Gisely's work has shown us. So thank you so much, everybody. It's wonderful to see you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for organizing, Rubika. Bye, everyone.